forms of democracy are indeed acceptable. Abroad, as the leading scholar advocate of democracy promotion concludes, we find a strong line of continuity. Democracy is acceptable if and only if it is consistent with strategic and economic interests. Thomas Carruthers. In modified form, the doctrine holds at home as well. The basic dilemma facing policymakers is sometimes candidly recognized at the dovish liberal extreme of the spectrum. For example, by Robert Pastor, President Carter's national security advisor for Latin America. He explained why the administration had to support the murderous and corrupt Somoza regime in Nicaragua, and when that proved impossible, to try at least to maintain the U.S.-trained National Guard, even as it was massacring the population with a brutality a nation usually reserves for its enemy, killing some 40,000 people. The reason was the familiar one. The United States did not want to control Nicaragua or the other nations of the region, but it also did not want developments to get out of control. It wanted Nicaraguans to act independently, except when doing so would affect U.S. interests adversely. Similar dilemmas faced Bush administration planners after their invasion of Iraq. They want Iraqis to act independently, except when doing so would affect U.S. interests adversely. Iraq must therefore be sovereign and democratic, but within limits. It must somehow be constructed as an obedient client state, much in the manner of the traditional order in Central America. At a general level, the pattern is familiar, reaching to the opposite extreme of institutional structures. The Kremlin was able to maintain satellites that were run by domestic political and military forces with the iron fist poised. Germany was able to do much the same in occupied Europe even while it was at war, as did fascist Japan in Manchuria, its Manchukuo. Fascist Italy achieved similar results in North Africa while carrying out virtual genocide that in no way harmed its favorable image in the West and possibly inspired Hitler. Traditional imperial and neo-colonial systems illustrate many variations on similar themes. To achieve the traditional goals in Iraq has proven to be surprisingly difficult, despite unusually favorable circumstances, as already reviewed. The dilemma of combining a measure of independence with firm control arose in a stark form not long after the invasion, as mass nonviolent resistance compelled the invaders to accept far more Iraqi initiative than they had anticipated. The outcome even evoked the nightmarish prospect of a more or less democratic and sovereign Iraq taking its place in a loose Shiite alliance comprising Iran, Shiite Iraq, and possibly the nearby Shiite-dominated regions of Saudi Arabia, controlling most of the world's oil and independent of Washington. The situation could get worse. Iran might give up on hopes that Europe could become independent of the United States and turn eastward. Highly relevant background is discussed by Selig Harrison, a leading specialist on these topics. The nuclear negotiations between Iran and the European Union were based on a bargain that the EU, held back by the US, has failed to honor, Harrison observes. The bargain was that Iran would suspend uranium enrichment, and the EU would undertake security guarantees. The language of the joint declaration was unambiguous. A mutually acceptable agreement, it said, would not only provide objective guarantees that Iran's nuclear program is exclusively for peaceful purposes, but would equally provide firm commitments on security issues. The phrase security issues is a thinly veiled reference to the threats by the United States and Israel to bomb Iran, and preparations to do so. The model regularly adduced is Israel's bombing of Iraq's Osirak reactor in 1981, which appears to have initiated Saddam's nuclear weapons programs, another demonstration that violence tends to elicit violence. Any attempt to execute similar plans against Iran could lead to immediate violence, as is surely understood in Washington. During a visit to Tehran, the influential Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr warned that his militia would defend Iran in the case of any attack, one of the strongest signs yet, the Washington Post reported, that Iraq could become a battleground in any Western conflict with Iran, raising the specter of Iraqi Shiite militias, or perhaps even the U.S.-trained Shiite-dominated military, taking on American troops here in sympathy with Iran. The Sadrist bloc, which registered substantial gains in the December 2005 elections, may soon become the most powerful single political force in Iraq. It is consciously pursuing the model of other successful Islamist groups, such as Hamas in Palestine, combining strong resistance to military occupation with grassroots social organizing and service to the poor. Washington's unwillingness to allow regional security issues to be considered is nothing new. It has also arisen repeatedly in the confrontation with Iraq. In the background is the matter of Israeli nuclear weapons, a topic that Washington bars from international consideration. Beyond that lurks what Harrison rightly describes as the central problem facing the global non-proliferation regime: the failure of the nuclear states to live up to their NPT obligation to phase out their own nuclear weapons, and, in Washington's case, formal rejection of the obligation. Unlike Europe, China refuses to be intimidated by Washington, a primary reason for the growing fear of China on the part of U.S. planners. Much of Iran's oil already goes to China, and China is providing Iran with weapons, presumably considered a deterrent to U.S. threats. Still more uncomfortable for Washington is the fact that the Sino-Saudi relationship has developed dramatically, including Chinese military aid to Saudi Arabia and gas exploration rights for China. By 2005, Saudi Arabia provided about 17% of China's oil imports. Chinese and Saudi oil companies have signed deals for drilling and construction of a huge refinery, with ExxonMobil as a partner. A January 2006 visit by Saudi King Abdullah to Beijing was expected to lead to a Sino-Saudi Memorandum of Understanding calling for increased cooperation and investment between the two countries in oil, natural gas, and minerals. Indian analyst Ijaz Ahmad observes that Iran could emerge as the virtual linchpin in the making, over the next decade or so, of what China and Russia have come to regard as an absolutely indispensable Asian energy security grid for breaking Western control of the world's energy supplies and securing the great industrial revolution of Asia. South Korea and Southeast Asian countries are likely to join, possibly Japan as well. A crucial question is how India will react. It rejected U.S. pressures to withdraw from an oil pipeline deal with Iran. On the other hand, India joined the United States and the EU in voting for an anti-Iranian resolution at the IAEA, joining also in their hypocrisy, since India rejects the NPT regime to which Iran, so far, appears to be largely conforming. Ahmad reports that India may have secretly reversed its stand under Iranian threats to terminate a $20 billion gas deal. Washington later warned India that its nuclear deal with the U.S. could be ditched if India did not go along with U.S. demands, eliciting a sharp rejoinder from the Indian Foreign Ministry and an evasive tempering of the warning by the U.S. Embassy. India, too, has options. It may choose to be a U.S. client, or it may prefer to join a more independent Asian bloc that is taking shape, with growing ties to Middle East oil producers. In a series of informative commentaries, the deputy editor of The Hindu observes that if the 21st century is to be an Asian century, Asia's passivity in the energy sector has to end. Though it hosts the world's largest producers and fastest-growing consumers of energy, Asia still relies on institutions, trading frameworks and armed forces from outside the region in order to trade with itself, a debilitating heritage from the imperial era. The key is India-China cooperation. In 2005, he points out, India and China managed to confound analysts around the world by turning their much-vaunted rivalry for the acquisition of oil and gas assets in third countries into a nascent partnership that could alter the basic dynamics of the global energy market. A January 2006 agreement signed in Beijing cleared the way for India and China to collaborate not only in technology, but also in hydrocarbon exploration and production. a partnership that eventually could alter fundamental equations in the world's oil and natural gas sector. At a meeting in New Delhi of Asian energy producers and consumers a few months earlier, India had unveiled an ambitious